The power of calm, mastering your frame. Introduction. Have you ever found yourself ensnared in a conversation that began with innocent intent, only to devolve into a charged exchange where voices escalate, accusations fly, and you feel yourself drawn into an emotional vortex you never intended to inhabit? It is a familiar choreography, is it not? We often labor under the illusion that to be heard, to exert influence, we must be the loudest, the most assertive, the one who presses their point with unyielding force. We might persuade ourselves that displaying our frustration, our anger, or our unwavering conviction is the surest path to prevailing in an argument or achieving our desired outcome. Yet, time and again, this outward exhibition of power leaves us feeling depleted, misunderstood, and paradoxically, even further from our objective. These moments, wherein we feel overwhelmed or manipulated by another's emotional intensity, are profoundly unsettling. It is that disquieting sensation of being sucked in, of losing one's equilibrium and composure, often because the other person's emotional fervor has become the dominant force. But what if the key to navigating these challenging interactions, to holding one's ground and even steering them toward a more constructive resolution, does not lie in amplifying one's voice or mirroring their intensity? What if it resides not in external force, but in a profound inner stillness? At the core of this concept lies something we term frame. Conceive of your frame as the invisible envelope of your perspective, your beliefs, and your emotional state that you carry with you. It is akin to the operating system of your mind, dictating how you perceive the world and engage with it. When your frame is robust and stable, you are anchored. You can approach situations with lucidity and a sense of inner serenity. Now, frame control is the capacity to preserve one's own strong frame, to establish the tone and underlying protocols of an interaction, and to do so without succumbing to facile sway or being drawn into another's emotional tempest. It is not about manipulation or attempting to dominate others in a detrimental fashion. Rather, it is about self-mastery. When we speak of being sucked in, we are describing a juncture at which our frame has been compromised. If another person becomes intensely emotional and we respond with equal vehemence, our own frame begins to falter. We commence reacting to their emotions rather than acting from our own stable vantage point. This reactive posture signifies that our frame is no longer in command. Theirs has usurped control, drawing us into their emotional orbit. The potency of composure, therefore, is intrinsically linked to this. A calm demeanor is not merely an agreeable disposition, it is a powerful indicator of a stable frame. When your voice remains steady, when your respiration is unperturbed, even when confronted with potent emotions from others, it demonstrates that your internal landscape is not readily destabilized. These external manifestations, such as a voice abruptly rising at the conclusion of a sentence, can be subtle clues that an individual's frame is under duress. It is tempting to believe that we can simply don a facade of courage, to affect an air of calm and collectedness when we are anything but. However, genuine reactions cannot be feigned when provoked. If someone presses your sensitive points, and you have neglected the internal cultivation, a superficial pretense of tranquility is likely to disintegrate. Authentic frame control is not a performance. It is a state of being that emanates from the deepest recesses of oneself. This is precisely why the journey toward mastering your frame necessitates deep inner work. It involves introspection, comprehending your own emotional topography, and cultivating resilience from the ground up. This is not about suppressing your feelings. It is about understanding them, processing them, and learning to relinquish that which no longer serves you. A pivotal element of this internal endeavor is the identification of your personal buttons, those specific stimuli that tend to elicit a strong emotional response within you. These are the tender spots that, when touched, can undermine your frame and render you reactive. Consider this. What words, what circumstances, what forms of behavior from others tend to cause you to lose your equanimity, or adopt a defensive posture. Self-analysis, posing the question, "What are my buttons?" and even cataloging them, is an indispensable preliminary step toward emotional regulation. It is akin to becoming an investigator of your own inner world, uncovering the patterns that precipitate those moments of being sucked in. This book serves as your compass for unlocking that quiet power residing within. It is a voyage not of emotional suppression, but of their comprehension, their mastery, and ultimately, the deployment of that mastery to navigate the intricacies of human interaction with grace, assurance, and undeniable influence. We shall dissect the psychology underpinning our susceptibility to others' emotional frames, and we shall delve into practical methodologies for cultivating the self-awareness requisite for identifying your triggers. You will acquire strategies for managing those triggers and for forging a robust, stable frame that empowers you to remain grounded even amidst arduous conversations. This is a blueprint for achieving genuine emotional fortitude and mastering your frame, thereby enabling you to communicate with clarity and lead interactions with a calm, grounded presence. Let us commence. Chapter 1. Understanding your frame. 1. What is frame control? We often equate conversational strength with loudness, forcefulness, or an outpouring of emotion. The image conjured is of someone who can bellow loudest, argue most aggressively, or express their feelings with searing intensity, believing this signifies command. This common perception, however, is a profound misinterpretation of true influence and control. Frame control refers to something far more subtle and potent. It is not an outward performance designed to dominate, but rather a quiet, unwavering inner state that equips one to navigate any interaction with poise and self-assurance. Consider a frame as the invisible architecture supporting a conversation or relationship. It is the underlying context, the implicit rules, and the ambient emotional tenor that dictates the flow of interaction. When your frame is robust, you are akin to a sturdy vessel weathering a tempest. Though waves may crash and winds may shriek, your ship remains upright, its course unaltered. You are not easily capsized or diverted. This inner fortitude is the essence of frame control, the capacity to establish and maintain an environment of calm, clarity, and emotional equilibrium. Conversely, a fragile frame resembles a flimsy raft, susceptible to capsizing with the slightest disturbance. A weak frame renders you easily susceptible to the pronouncements and actions of others, causing you to lose your bearings and react indiscriminately. This is the phenomenon of being sucked in when another's potent emotion or conviction ensnares you, pulling you into their orbit, and obscuring your own perspective and emotional stability. Observe the dynamic when one participant in an exchange becomes visibly distressed. Their voice may rise, their face flush, or tears may fall. Should your frame be weak, an immediate impulse to mirror their emotional state may arise. You might feel guilt, anxiety, or defensiveness. This could manifest as an overwhelming urge to placate them, or perhaps a retaliatory anger. In such moments, you relinquish command of your own emotional landscape and the trajectory of the conversation. You have been drawn into their frame, their emotional drama. The intensity of their reaction often betrays a weaker frame on their part, a vulnerability that can prove contagious, drawing you in. This octant dynamic is a primary reason we often emerge from certain interactions feeling depleted or manipulated. We may commence with a sense of confidence and clarity regarding our objectives, only to find ourselves, by the conversation's conclusion, acquiescing to unwanted terms or mired in confusion and distress. This is seldom the result of a deliberate, masterful manipulation by the other party. More often, it stems from their possessing, perhaps unconsciously, a stronger frame in that moment, or from our own frame. Having faltered, we have allowed our emotional vulnerabilities to be exploited, thereby ceding our agency. Authentic influence, therefore, is not derived from being the loudest or the most theatrical. It emanates from being the most steadfast. When you can sustain your own calm, clear, and grounded frame, even amidst another's agitation, you become an anchor of Stability. There is no need to impose your will. Your very presence, your unshakable composure subtly steers the interaction. You are not reacting to their emotional storm, you are offering a tranquil haven. Herein lies the true power, not in controlling others, but in mastering oneself. It is crucial to understand that this is not a prescription for emotional detachment or suppression. Genuine frame control does not entail stifling emotions or feigning their absence. It involves understanding them, managing them, and ensuring they do not dictate your actions or your influence. A weak frame can manifest subtly, a rising inflection at the end of a sentence when asserting a point, or a slight tremor in the hands when experiencing anxiety. These are superficial indicators of an inner imbalance. Attempting to project composure when genuinely provoked is akin to constructing a dwelling upon sand. It may appear sound initially, but the first strong gust will bring it tumbling down. Consequently, the bedrock of frame control lies in deep inner work. It is not a stratagem or a technique acquirable overnight, but a cultivated skill born from profound self-understanding. This necessitates identifying your personal emotional triggers, those specific stimuli that tend to provoke strong reactions, disrupt your composure, or elicit defensiveness. These are your buttons. When someone discovers how to press these buttons, they can readily destabilize your frame. Consider this. If you possess a button that, when pressed, ignites deep insecurity, and someone is aware of this and makes a comment that touches upon that insecurity, you may suddenly become flustered, defensive, or excessively eager to please. You have lost your frame. You have been drawn into their game, granting them a degree of influence over you that would be impossible if you were cognizant of your button and had learned to manage your response to it. The prevailing societal conception of communicative strength frequently misleads us. We are conditioned to believe that assertiveness equates to loudness, or that emotional expression signifies passion. While these can be components of healthy communication, they are distinct from frame control. Assertiveness, when rooted in a robust internal frame, is calm and lucid. Passion, when channeled through a stable frame, is inspiring, not overwhelming. When we conflate outward displays of force or emotion with genuine strength, we predispose ourselves to failure. We may attempt to be loud, but if our voice betrays insecurity, our efforts are rendered ineffective. We may strive for stoicism, but if our eyes reveal inner turmoil, our pretense lacks conviction. The repercussions of losing frame control can be substantial. In personal relationships, it can engender misunderstandings, conflicts, and a pervasive sense of unease. You may find yourself uttering regrettable words or making decisions detrimental to your well-being. In professional spheres, a compromised frame can lead to missed opportunities, overlooked advancements, or challenges in effective leadership. When constantly reacting to others, your capacity for clear thought, strategic decision-making, and inspiring confidence is diminished. You become a follower of others' emotional currents rather than the captain of your own vessel. Imagine, for instance, a negotiation. You are endeavoring to secure a fair price for a service. The other party, perhaps sensing your eagerness or an underlying insecurity about your value, adopts a dismissive tone. They might remark, frankly, "I've received better offers," or "Are you certain you can deliver at that price?" Should your frame be weak, these remarks may strike a raw nerve. You might experience a surge of anxiety, a desperate need to validate yourself, or a rush of anger at their perceived disrespect. Consequently, you might hastily reduce your price, agree to unfavorable terms, or resort to an aggressive defense, which itself can signal a weak frame. You have been drawn into their attempt to exert pressure. Conversely, an individual possessing strong frame control would register these comments and remain centered. They understand their worth and the equity of their proposal. They have no need for a defensive retort. They might calmly state, "I understand you seek the optimal deal, and I am confident in the value I offer. Let us focus on how my service can address your specific requirements." They have acknowledged the other party's statement without allowing it to destabilize their internal state or their objective. They have resisted being drawn into the other's gambit of sowing doubt or applying pressure. They have preserved their own frame, keeping the dialogue focused on substance rather than emotional manipulation. This capacity for centeredness is not about emotional sterility. It is about cultivating a healthy relationship with one's emotions. It is about recognizing emotions as signals, not mandates. Anger, for example, can indicate a boundary violation. Anxiety can signal uncertainty. However, rather than allowing these signals to overwhelm and dictate behavior, frame control enables one to observe them, comprehend their message, and then consciously select a response. One can acknowledge anger and choose to calmly articulate a boundary, or acknowledge anxiety and opt to gather further information before making a decision. Thus, what is frame control? It is the quiet potency that arises from an unshakable inner calm. It is the ability to maintain one's emotional and mental space, irrespective of external circumstances. It is the foundation of genuine influence, not through coercion, but through an absence of being coerced. It is the art of being so firmly rooted in one's own being that one becomes a point of certainty for oneself and, by extension, for others. It is not about erecting a barrier, but about forging a strong, resilient core. Understanding what frame control entails and how readily it can be compromised by our internal landscape and interpersonal dynamics underscores the critical imperative to proactively cultivate it. The subsequent step involves a deeper exploration of the mechanisms by which our frame is established and, more crucially, how it can be undermined by our inner world. 2. The role of emotions in communication. Our exchanges are rarely mere logical dissections of thought. Beneath the veneer of spoken words, a potent undercurrent of emotion surges, dictating the cadence of our speech, the receptivity of our listening, and ultimately, the depth of our connection. This invisible emotional tide forms the bedrock of our frame, the unspoken architecture of our perceptions, assumptions, and inner disposition that colors every interaction. A robust foundation yields a resilient frame. A precarious one renders it susceptible to collapse, leaving us adrift and disempowered. Consider this. When tranquility and self-assurance pervade your being, the world seems to unfurl with effortless grace. Challenges feel surmountable, and the pronouncements of others land with a different resonance. You can engage with an open mind, respond with considered deliberation, and maintain an unwavering compass. This is the manifest power of a strong frame. But what transpires when irritation simmers? Or when a barbed remark ignites defensiveness? Suddenly, your mental landscape contracts. You may find yourself replaying acrimonious words, a knot tightening in your stomach, or your own speech acquiring an unintended sharpness. In these instances, your emotional tenor has directly reshaped your frame, rendering it brittle, reactive, and diminished in influence. This underscores the paramount importance of comprehending emotions' role. It is not mere background static. Rather, it comprises the active agents that either fortify our frame or orchestrate its erosion. Our emotional state is the very ground upon which our communicative frame is constructed. A serene, centered emotional disposition underpins a stable, unwavering frame, enabling us to traverse conversations with lucidity and purpose. Envision a steadfast dwelling erected on solid earth. It can weather any tempest. Yet, a structure founded on shifting sands will tremble at the gentlest breeze. Our emotions are that ground. When anxiety, anger, or overwhelm grip us, this emotional terrain becomes unstable, inevitably weakening our frame. Our capacity for clear thought diminishes, our ability to listen effectively falters, and we become prone to impulsive reactions. The crux of our book's thesis, deep inner work and emotional letting go, resides precisely here. It is not about the pretense of emotional absence, a futile endeavor akin to stemming a tidal wave with bare hands. Authentic non-reactivity, the very architect of a robust frame, is cultivated by learning to process and release emotions before they commandeer our responses. It involves acknowledging the nascent feeling, a flicker of annoyance, a pang of disappointment, a surge of elation, and then consciously choosing not to permit it to usurp our composure. This internal dominion empowers us to sustain our equilibrium, irrespective of external pressures. This leads us to a pervasive communication pitfall, the phenomenon of being sucked in. Have you ever found yourself inexplicably drawn into another's emotional drama, almost against your will? Observe someone visibly distressed, their voice quivering or their words laced with exasperation. Before you realize it, you might feel a wave of empathy, an urge to intervene and fix the situation, or even a mirroring of their anger. This is emotional contagion in action, a stark indicator of a compromised frame. When one party's emotional volatility signals a weakened frame, they become susceptible to being ensnared by the other's emotional state or agenda. It operates like a magnetic force. A potent emotional display from one individual can powerfully draw others into their orbit, compelling them to react rather than respond from a place of intentional calm. The summary aptly notes that stronger emotional reactions from one party subcommunicate a weaker frame. This is a vital revelation. When an individual raises their voice, adopts a defensive posture, or articulates overt frustration, they are unconsciously broadcasting a deficit in internal regulation. This is not necessarily a deliberate act of manipulation, but often a genuine reflection of their inner turmoil. Others, however, perceive these signals. We are biologically attuned to emotional cues. A raised voice can activate our own fight-or-flight response, inducing a sense of threat and defensiveness. A display of sorrow can elicit our empathy, sometimes to the extent that we internalize their burdens. In such moments, we cease to operate from our own clear frame, becoming ensnared by the others, forfeiting our agency and influence. Consider this scenario. Sarah endeavors to broach a household chore with her partner, Mark. Overwhelmed by work and harboring a subtle resentment that the task remains undone, Sarah initiates the conversation. Her voice tightens imperceptibly, and her tone betrays a hint of criticism. Mark, himself weary from a long day and feeling particularly sensitive, instantly registers Sarah's inflection. His frame, perhaps neutral or even positive moments prior, begins to shift. He experiences a prickle of defensiveness. Instead of perceiving Sarah's utterance as a simple request, he interprets it as an indictment. His own emotional response, defensiveness, is triggered. He might retort, "I was just about to do it," or "Why are you always nagging me?" In this exchange, Sarah's subtle emotional signals the constricted voice, the critical inflection signaled a weakening frame. Mark, in turn, was sucked in by her emotional state. His own frame, rather than maintaining its stability, became reactive to hers. The dialogue rapidly devolved from a straightforward discussion about a chore into a conflict fueled by each individual's emotional responses. Neither party harbors intentional malice. They are simply ensnared in the web of emotional contagion, their frames eroding under the pressure of their own and each other's feelings. The underlying dynamics and emotional tenor of the interaction, which Sarah initially intended to establish with a calm request, were utterly derailed by her emotional state and Mark's reactive counter. While the essence of frame control is internal, our emotional state manifests in tangible, observable ways. Our vocalizations and nonverbal cues serve as outward indicators of our frame stability or its precariousness. These are the subtle signals that others subconsciously absorb, even if they cannot precisely articulate their perception. Recall the summary's mention of vocal cues, like a voice going up at the end of a sentence. This subtle upward inflection, often so minute we might overlook it ourselves, can betray underlying anxiety or uncertainty. It suggests a lack of complete conviction in our pronouncements or a subconscious plea for validation or permission. Similarly, a slight hesitation before speaking, a tendency to fidget, or the avoidance of eye contact can all signal that Our internal frame is not as robust as we might desire. These are not indicators of inherent frailty, but rather signals that our emotions are currently influencing our composure. When we feel confident and centered, our voice tends to be steady and grounded. Our posture is likely more open, and our gaze more direct. These outward manifestations convey a sense of inner command, a stable frame that naturally draws others in and encourages them to engage from a similar place of groundedness. This distinction is critical, the difference between feigned composure and genuine emotional regulation. We might attempt to project an air of calmness, forcing a smile and adopting a measured tone, even when turmoil churns within. However, this performance is rarely sustainable. Our authentic emotional state invariably finds a way to surface, particularly when we are provoked. The summary powerfully articulates this. Deep inner work and emotional letting go are essential because genuine reactions cannot be faked. When triggered, our buttons, those specific emotional triggers capable of precipitating a spiral, will inevitably be pressed. And when they are, only in internalized resilience, forged through genuine self-awareness and emotional processing, can avert a complete frame collapse. Imagine attempting to disavow a fear of heights while perched precariously on a high ledge. You might exhort yourself to be courageous, you might strive for an upright stance, but the visceral sensations of fear, the trembling limbs, the racing heart are formidable to suppress. In communication, our emotional buttons operate on a similar principle. Someone might utter words that strike a sensitive chord, perhaps an old insecurity or a past wound. If we have neglected the inner work required to comprehend and process that trigger, our immediate, authentic reaction will likely be emotional. We might lash out, withdraw, or become excessively apologetic. No amount of superficial serenity can mask that underlying emotional surge when it is truly activated. This is why the emphasis on inner work is so profoundly important. It entails understanding the genesis of why certain situations or comments provoke our buttons. It involves discerning the patterns of our emotional responses and learning to manage them at their root. This is not about transforming into emotionless automatons. It is about becoming masters of our own emotional landscape so that our emotions serve us, rather than dictate our actions. When we cultivate this internal fortitude, our frame becomes unassailable. We can still experience emotions, joy, sorrow, frustration, but they cease to dictate our conduct or our influence. We can acknowledge them, process them, and choose our response rather than being swept away by their current. Let us delve further into how specific emotional states inherently predispose us to particular communication frames. When we experience frustration, for instance, our frame often morphs into one of complaint or demand. Our focus narrows to perceived deficiencies, and our tone may adopt an impatient or accusatory quality. This naturally invites defensiveness from others as they feel assailed or blamed. Our influence wanes because the interaction becomes centered on alleviating our frustration rather than on achieving a shared objective. Conversely, if we are overcome with excessive excitement or enthusiasm, our frame might manifest as a rapid-fire barrage of ideas or an inability to absorb external input. We may dominate the conversation, eager to articulate every fleeting thought. While this ardor can be infectious, it can also overwhelm others and leave them feeling unheard. Our influence diminishes because we are not fostering an environment conducive to collaboration or genuine connection. We are merely broadcasting our own effervescence. Fear or anxiety, as we have alluded to, precipitates a frame of apprehension or a compulsion to appease. We might become excessively accommodating, assiduously avoiding conflict, or our voice may convey palpable uncertainty. This can engender doubt in others regarding our convictions or our capacity for leadership. They may sense our insecurity and, consciously or unconsciously, begin to assume control, subtly shifting the dynamic to their advantage. Our influence recedes because we are signaling a lack of confidence in our own position. The immediate ramifications for our influence are profound. When our frame is dictated by a reactive emotion such as frustration, we invite discord. When it is dictated by excessive elation, we risk alienating others. When it is dictated by fear, we relinquish control. In each instance, our capacity to steer the interaction, to establish the prevailing tone, and to realize our intended outcomes is severely compromised. The exchange transforms from constructive discourse into an exercise in managing emotional fallout. Now, let us examine the subconscious mechanisms by which one person's emotional reactivity can compel another to reciprocate. This is where the sucked-in phenomenon truly exerts its grip. We are inherently social beings, and our brains are perpetually engaged in scanning for social cues. When an individual displays potent emotions, particularly negative ones like anger or distress, it triggers a primal response within us. Our mirror neurons, for example, are believed to play a crucial role. These neurons activate both when we perform an action and when we observe another performing the same action. This phenomenon may extend to emotional states, implying that witnessing someone's anger can, on a subconscious level, evoke similar feelings within us. Furthermore, our innate drive for social harmony can impel us to attempt de-escalation. If someone directs anger towards us, our instinct might be to retaliate in self-defense, or conversely, to placate them in an effort to restore equilibrium. Both are fundamentally reactive responses. The act of retaliation is a direct mirroring of their aggression, pulling us into their frame of conflict. The act of placation, while seemingly constructive, can also represent an erosion of frame, as we prioritize the other person's emotional comfort over our own clear communication or boundaries. We feel compelled to react because their emotional state creates an imbalance that our subconscious mind endeavors to rectify, often through mirroring or by attempting to diffuse the intensity. Consider it akin to ripples on the surface of a pond. If you cast a pebble and emotional outburst into the water, the resulting ripples propagate outwards, disturbing the tranquility. Our own emotional state is analogous to the surface of that pond. When another individual's emotional eruption generates powerful ripples, those disturbances inevitably reach us, unsettling our calm surface and compelling us to respond in some manner, often by generating our own ripples in return. This is how the 3. Building self-awareness. We often drift through our days as vessels adrift on autopilot. We react, we respond, we perform the motions, but do we truly grasp the why? For many, the answer is a quiet, perhaps even disquieting, negative. We find ourselves uttering words we later regret, experiencing emotions that seem to erupt from some unseen wellspring, and questioning how we transition from a state of tranquility to one of vexation or apprehension. This is not an indictment of frailty, but rather a testament to a blind spot. It is akin to attempting to navigate a labyrinthine chart without a compass. One may advance, but certainty of one's trajectory remains elusive. This deficit in self-perception is precisely what renders our internal frame, the steadfast context and emotional tenor we project, susceptible to the tremors of external influences. When we remain ignorant of our own inner machinations, we are as an unlatched portal, easily swayed by any who might choose to exert pressure. The odyssey toward mastering one's frame commences not with attempts to alter others, nor even with efforts to command external circumstances. It begins unequivocally and fundamentally with a profound exploration of the self. It entails an inward gaze imbued with candor and intellectual curiosity, much like a scientist scrutinizing a captivating, albeit occasionally untidy experiment. This is the very essence of cultivating self-awareness, comprehending the intricate topography of one's own intellect and spirit. At the core of this self-awareness, within the purview of frame control, lies the discernment of what I term our buttons. Conceive of them as minute, exquisitely sensitive toggles nestled within us. Certain enunciations, specific vocal inflections, particular actions, or even distinct scenarios possess the capacity to activate these toggles, precipitating an immediate, frequently predictable, emotional response. These are not inherently undesirable reactions, they are, quite simply, our reactions. They might manifest as a surge of indignation when one perceives a lack of respect, a wave of unease when confronted with ambiguity, a profound sense of inadequacy when juxtaposed with others, or an overwhelming compulsion to appease when dreading disapproval. Consider Sarah. Sarah presides as a project manager, generally adept and well-regarded. Yet, there exists a particular colleague, Mark, whose critiques invariably seem to plunge her into disarray. When Mark, with his characteristically unvarnished candor, highlights a deficiency in her presentation, Sarah's stomach clenches, her palms perspire, and a heat suffuses her neck. Her mind races, conjuring specters of past failures and the dread that every individual in the assembly now perceives her as inept. Her placid, composed demeanor dissolves, supplanted by a defensive posture and an abrupt cadence. Mark's feedback, which might serve as a constructive catalyst for another, acts as a direct assault upon one of Sarah's most vulnerable buttons, the dread of insufficient worth. She is so ensnared by the internal tempest that she overlooks the substantive import of Mark's observation, and her frame, in that fleeting instant, is utterly destabilized. She is no longer orchestrating the discourse, she is succumbing to an internal alarm. This is the blind spot of unawareness in its active manifestation. Sarah does not consciously elect to feel defensive. It is an automatic reflex. She remains oblivious to the profound impact Mark's words exert upon her. She might rationalize, Mark is merely being obstinate, or he is endeavoring to subvert me. While such interpretations may hold a kernel of truth, the true potency of that moment resides not in Mark's intent, but in the existence and acute sensitivity of Sarah's not good enough button. Were Sarah to cultivate self-awareness, she would begin to apprehend this recurring pattern. She would discern the physiological indicators, the tightening abdomen, the racing thoughts, and correlate them with Mark's specific pronouncements. This recognition constitutes the initial, indispensable stride. The act of identifying these buttons is not an exercise in self-recrimination or the attribution of blame to others. It is an undertaking of unvarnished, straightforward observation. What provokes within you an unusual degree of irritation? What pronouncements leave you feeling dispirited or anxious? What scenarios consistently engender a desire to retreat or to retaliate? These are your signposts. They are the fragments of evidence that guide you toward a more profound comprehension of your own internal operational matrix. It is imperative to delineate between an authentic, unscripted reaction and a deliberate performance. When our buttons are depressed, our genuine frame is laid bare. If Sarah, in the wake of Mark's critique, were to inhale deeply, acknowledge the internal sensation, and then calmly articulate, "Thank you for that feedback, Mark. Could you elaborate on what specifically you believe could be enhanced?" That would signify a controlled frame. She would still experience an internal response, yet she would be exercising agency in her reply. The involuntary surge of defensiveness, however, represents her unscripted reaction, a direct signal of a compromised frame. This distinction is paramount. Self-awareness empowers us to discern when we are acting from a position of genuine volition versus when we are being swept away by an automatic, emotional current. The cultivation of this self-awareness is a discipline of observation devoid of censure. It is facile to succumb to the snare of self-condemnation. When we perceive ourselves reacting adversely, the immediate thought may be, "I ought not to feel this way," or "I am lamentably weak for allowing this to affect me." This judgment, however, merely amplifies the emotional static, obscuring clarity. Instead, endeavor to approach your reactions with the gentle inquisitiveness of a detective. Your objective is not to assign fault, but to apprehend the nexus of cause and effect. Envision yourself observing a nature documentary chronicling a bird's nest. You witness the parental birds procuring sustenance, the fledglings vocalizing, the predator lurking. You do not condemn the bird for experiencing fear or for nurturing its offspring. You simply observe the behaviors and the underlying instincts. In a parallel fashion, when you detect within yourself a particular emotional resonance, attempt to observe it. Where do you perceive it within your corporeal form? What cognitive processes accompany it? What was the precipitating event? This detached observation engenders a crucial interstice between the stimulus and your response. It is within this interstitial space that true choice resides. For Sarah, this might translate into maintaining a concise journal following her interactions with Mark. She might record, "Today, Mark identified a typographical error on slide 7. I felt a constriction in my chest and a desire to dispute. I noticed my voice grew sharper. I realized I was afraid he perceived me as careless." Over time, these observations would coalesce into a more lucid depiction. She would apprehend that the fear of appearing careless, rather than the typo itself, is the true instigator. She would grasp that her physiological and verbal responses are her frame subtly signaling her internal disquiet. What are the most prevalent buttons or catalysts that tend to destabilize my frame, and what specific circumstances or forms of communication activate them? This is a query that necessitates unvarnished introspection. For myself, personally, I have discovered that when I perceive my expertise being challenged without a sincere endeavor to comprehend, my frame can become defensive. It is not about asserting correctness, it is about feeling that my contributions are valued. This might transpire in a meeting where a proposal is summarily dismissed without clarifying inquiries, or in a casual exchange, where a deeply held conviction is challenged in a flippant manner. The trigger is not the dissent itself, but the perceived lack of deference for the deliberation and experience underpinning my stance. This often manifests as a subtle stiffening of my posture, a propensity to adopt a more formal mode of speech, and an inclination to present a meticulously logical, unassailable argument. How do my habitual emotional responses, for example defensiveness, anger, anxiety, people-pleasing, manifest physically and verbally when a button is pushed? And how do these manifestations signal a weaker frame to others? This is the juncture at which the external indicators become discernible. When my expertise button is activated, the physiological manifestation might be a slight tightening of the jaw, an accelerated cadence of speech, and an augmented tendency to employ more complex vocabulary, almost as if constructing a verbal bulwark. Verbally, I might become more direct, perhaps even somewhat curt, preempting potential counterarguments before they are fully articulated. This shift, this subtle yet definite alteration in my comportment, serves as an unambiguous signal to others that my frame has been subjected to challenge. They may sense my defensiveness, even if the precise etiology remains obscure. They might perceive me as less open or approachable. This is not an act of deliberate manipulation. It is the honest, albeit frequently unconscious, broadcast of our internal state. A robust frame, conversely, would enable me to sustain an even tone, acknowledge the inquiry, and perhaps even express curiosity. That's an interesting point. What leads you to that conclusion? This response maintains the frame's openness and invites further dialogue, rather than its truncation. What specific self-observation techniques, for example journaling, mindfulness, seeking feedback, have I found most efficacious in uncovering these latent triggers and patterns of reactivity? Journaling, as I have previously alluded to, is of inestimable value. It provides a private sanctuary for recording one's thoughts and sentiments without immediate repercussions. Mindfulness, too, is a potent instrument. It is the practice of directing one's attention to the present moment, observing one's thoughts and feelings without judgment. Even a few moments of mindful respiration can facilitate an awareness of the subtle fluctuations within one's physique and psyche throughout the day. When one experiences a prickle of irritation or a flutter of anxiety, mindfulness assists in pausing and inquiring, what is transpiring presently? Seeking feedback, though it may evoke a sense of vulnerability, is also profoundly illuminating. At times, Those closest to us can perceive our patterns with greater acuity than we ourselves can. Inquiring of a trusted confidant or partner, have you observed instances where I appear to become upset or defensive readily? What does that manifest as? Can yield profound insights. The key lies in soliciting this feedback from an individual in whom you have faith for both candor and kindness, someone who comprehends your aspiration for personal growth. The peril of eschewing this process of cultivating self-awareness lies in the continued fragility of our frames, readily susceptible to the buffeting winds of external influence. We may harbor the conviction of being in command, yet our reactions betray this assertion. We may believe we are communicating with efficacy, yet our underlying emotional disposition subtly permeates, shaping perceptions and interactions. This is why frame control transcends mere outward force or emotional exhibition. It is an endeavor of profound internal work. It is about forging resilience from the inside out. When we commence to perceive our internal landscape with clarity, to recognize the specific triggers that activate our buttons, and the habitual modes of our response, we unlock the potential for intentionality. This newfound awareness of our triggers and habitual reactions is not an ultimate destination, but the indispensable point of departure for actively electing our responses. It liberates us from the confines of autopilot and ushers us into a realm of conscious decision-making. We can begin to understand that when Mark offers a critical observation, it is not necessarily an indictment of our intrinsic worth, but perhaps merely his distinct mode of communication. We can then choose our response, rather than being compelled to react. This is the very bedrock upon which we can commence to actively master our frame, transitioning from a passive passenger in our emotional existence to a skilled pilot. The subsequent phase, once we possess this internal compass, is to comprehend how these internal frames are not immutable but are in perpetual flux, continuously shaped and challenged by external forces, and how we can navigate these challenges with grace and fortitude. Chapter 2. Developing Emotional Mastery. 1. Harnessing Emotional Power. Emotions are akin to potent river currents. They possess the capacity to sweep us away or, with learned navigation, to propel us forward. For too long, many have perceived their feelings as adversaries to be fought, concealed, or suppressed. The apprehension that revealing anger might be interpreted as weakness, or that sadness signifies insufficient strength, is a pervasive misconception. This is the primary obstacle we must surmount on the journey to mastering our internal framework. Consider the analogy of a tempestuous wind. A flimsy tent, susceptible to its force, will thrash and tear, eventually succumbing to collapse. Inversely, a robust edifice, deeply anchored, may sway but will ultimately stand firm. Our emotions are the wind, and our inner fortitude, our frame, is the structure. A weak frame renders us vulnerable to being toppled by the emotional gale. However, a strong frame enables us to weather the storm with unwavering equilibrium. The objective is not to eradicate feeling and endeavor as futile and exhausting as attempting to halt the incoming tide. True potency resides in recognizing that emotions are not directives, but rather signals. They are messengers, conveying vital information about our internal and external landscapes. The tremor of anxiety preceding a significant engagement is not an injunction to retreat, but a signal of importance and your body's preparation. The surge of frustration when a plan falters is not a command to erupt, but an indication that expectations have been unmet, necessitating an assessment of the circumstances. The common error lies in the attempt to suppress these sensations. The internal admonition, "Don't be angry," or "Just get over it," is akin to forcing a beach ball beneath the water's surface. While achievable momentarily, it demands immense effort and invariably results in the ball breaching the surface with amplified force. Suppressed emotions do not vanish. They fester, accumulating pressure. Their eventual release, often unintended, can shatter composure and expose our framework to vulnerability. We become ensnared by the very feelings we sought to ignore, forfeiting influence and control. Genuine mastery, However, eschew suppression for transformation. It involves examining that beach ball and discerning the impetus for its ascent, its composition, its driving force. When we apply this to our emotions, we can begin to engage with them constructively. This necessitates a deeper exploration. Beyond simply experiencing anger, we must inquire, why am I angry? Does it stem from a sense of disrespect? From unmet expectations? From a perceived loss of control? Once the root cause is understood, transformation can commence. If anger arises from disrespect, cultivating self-worth can diminish reliance on external validation. If unmet expectations are the source, practicing flexibility and acceptance of life's inherent unpredictability becomes paramount. This internal work is the bedrock of frame fortification. It is not about feigning contentment when discontent prevails, but about addressing the underlying dynamics that grant emotions dominion over us. This is where the concept of channeling emotional energy becomes indispensable. Envision a powerful river. Unmanaged, it can inundate and devastate. Yet, with the construction of dams and canals, its waters can be harnessed to generate power and irrigate land. Our emotions, particularly their intense manifestations, are like this potent river. When overwhelmed, our frame collapses. But through understanding and management, this formidable energy can be directed. How is this achieved? A highly effective method is the cultivation of an inner calm observer. Imagine standing on the riverbank, witnessing the waters flow, its power, its velocity, its hue, yet remaining detached, not immersed. This internal observer is crucial for frame control. It is the faculty that perceives an emotion's emergence, the heat of anger, the sting of disappointment, the flutter of fear without becoming indistinguishable from it. When a potent emotion begins to swell, pause. Inhale deeply. Then gently attempt to observe it. Pose the questions: what am I feeling at this moment? Where in my body is this sensation located? What thoughts are intertwined with this feeling? This simple act of observation creates a vital interstitial space between stimulus and response, reclaiming agency. We cease to be marionettes animated by emotional strings and become the architects of our actions. Consider Sarah's experience. During a meeting, her colleague Mark interrupted her mid-sentence, dismissing her idea without full consideration. Sarah felt a surge of heat in her chest. Her immediate inclination was to retaliate, to defend her point vehemently, perhaps even to raise her voice. This would have been a hallmark of a fragile frame, an instantaneous, emotional reaction to perceived disrespect. She would have been consumed by Mark's rudeness, likely precipitating an unproductive altercation. Instead, Sarah recalled the principle of the calm observer. She drew a slow, deep breath. She acknowledged her anger. I am angry because Mark interrupted me and dismissed my idea, but she did not permit it to dictate her conduct. She observed the sensation, noting the tension in her shoulders and the rapid pulse. This brief interlude afforded her a moment for reflection. She recognized that a heated exchange would not advance her objective. It would merely escalate conflict. Rather than interrupting, she waited for Mark to conclude his statement. Then, with a measured and steady voice, she articulated, "Mark, I value your perspective. Before we proceed, I would like to finish presenting my idea, as I believe it addresses the core issue at hand." Her demeanor was not aggressive, but resolute. She prevented Mark's interruption from derailing her or her contribution. She channeled her initial anger not into an outburst, but into a clear, confident assertion that reclaimed her space and ensured her idea was heard. Her frame remained intact, and she retained her influence in the discourse. This transition from reactivity to proactive engagement is the ultimate aspiration. It signifies moving beyond mere emotional response to anticipating, understanding, and managing emotions before they exert control. This necessitates a conscious effort to identify our personal buttons, the specific situations, phrases, or actions that consistently elicit a pronounced emotional reaction. For Sarah, Mark's dismissive interruption was a button. For another, it might be a particular vocal inflection, a form of criticism, or a perceived slight. The objective is not to evade these triggers, an impossibility in the real world, but to comprehend them and to devise strategies for response in advance. This might involve preparing a ready phrase, as Sarah did, or employing a mental reframing technique. For instance, if a certain type of criticism invariably provokes defensiveness and insecurity, instead of succumbing to hurt and the urge to argue, one could preemptively affirm, "This is merely feedback. It does not define my inherent worth. I can receive this without compromising my self-esteem." This is an internal stratagem that fortifies the frame from within. It does not negate the criticism or the accompanying emotion, but actively chooses how to process it, thereby averting imbalance. The intensity of an unmanaged emotion directly correlates with a weakened frame. Recall a moment of profound anger or distress. Were you in control? Likely not. Thoughts may have raced, judgment may have been obscured, and actions taken might later be regretted. This overwhelming intensity is akin to a colossal wave, obliterating clear thought and strategic action. Your frame, your sense of self, and your capacity for direction is fractured. You become entirely susceptible to the emotional state of others, or the sheer force of your own feelings. You are no longer setting the tone, you are being swept away by it. Contrast this with a situation of mild annoyance. You acknowledge it, perhaps sigh, and then resume your task. The annoyance persists, but it does not consume you. Your frame remains stable because the emotional energy is manageable, a gentle breeze, not a hurricane. This underscores the critical importance of managing and transforming emotions for frame control. It is about mitigating the destructive potential of intense feelings and learning to harness their energy constructively, even when formidable. The tangible divergence between suppressing and harnessing an emotion is profound and enduring. Suppression is a superficial remedy with lasting repercussions. It is akin to capping a boiling pot without a vent. Pressure builds, culminating in an explosion that often inflicts greater damage than a gradual release of steam. Suppression demands continuous expenditure of energy to contain the emotion, leading to exhaustion, irritability, and diminished resilience. Over time, suppressed emotions can manifest as physical ailments, anxiety, or depression, rendering the frame brittle and prone to fracture. Under internal strain, harnessing, conversely, is a process of integration and transformation. It entails understanding the emotion's message, processing it healthily, and then releasing it or redirecting its energy. While requiring conscious effort, this process ultimately liberates energy, fostering a sense of lightness, resilience, and a more robust, adaptable frame. Emotions, rather than being a source of internal conflict, become conduits for insight and even power. The passion that might have fueled anger can instead propel a compelling argument. The energy of disappointment can drive the pursuit of novel solutions. This is not about emotional detachment, but about emotional intelligence and self-mastery. Beyond mere trigger identification, the practical internal mechanisms for transforming emotional responses involve cultivating profound self-awareness and employing specific mental disciplines. This entails fostering a habit of self-inquiry. When a potent emotion arises, instead of simply experiencing it, engage in a gentle, non-judgmental investigation. 1. Identify the emotion. Articulate it with clarity. I am experiencing frustration. I feel hurt. 2. Locate it in the body. Pinpoint its physical manifestation. It's a knot in my stomach. There's a tightness in my chest. This grounds the emotion in the physical, rendering it less abstract and overwhelming. 3. Explore the underlying belief. Ascertain the thought or belief that fuels this emotion. I believe I must always be accorded respect. I believe that disagreement implies my error. This is often the most arduous step, as core beliefs can be deeply entrenched and unconscious. 4. Challenge or reframe the belief. Once identified, can this belief be questioned? Is it universally applicable? Is there an alternative perspective? For example, if the belief is if people disagree with me, it means I am wrong, a refrain could be, disagreement can stem from myriad factors unrelated to the validity of my idea. My worth is not contingent upon universal consensus. 5. Practice acceptance and letting go. Acknowledge the emotion without judgment, recognizing its transient nature, then consciously choose to allow it to dissipate. Visualize it as a cloud drifting across the sky, observed, but not clung to. This process of internal transformation is the true architect of frame strength. It is not about erecting thicker defenses, but about cultivating a more resilient core. As we consistently engage in this self-inquiry, our emotional triggers lose their potency. They may still emerge, but their grip diminishes. We can acknowledge them, understand them. 2. Recognizing your triggers. When emotions surge, the facile inclination is to cast blame outward. A sharp word, an unwelcome gesture. These can ignite anger, defensiveness, or distress. Yet, the narrative rarely resides solely in the actions of another. It is profoundly interwoven with what those actions unearth within us. Consider your emotions as an intricate instrument. Ordinarily, it resonates with a steady, clear melody. But certain tones, certain discordant notes, can provoke a jarring cry, a sudden fracture. These are your emotional triggers, invisible levers, when pressed, initiating a potent, often involuntary, response. Recognizing these triggers is not merely a preliminary step toward mastering your internal state. It is arguably the most vital. It mirrors a physician diagnosing an ailment before administering a cure. These triggers are not arbitrary vexations. They are potent signposts, illuminating our vulnerabilities. They point to inner sanctuaries harboring old wounds, deep-seated insecurities, or unmet expectations. When another's words or deeds strike these tender chords, it transcends mere surface irritation. It can feel like the reopening of a profound wound. This underscores the wisdom of the transcript's counsel. Analyze yourself. What are my buttons? It is an invitation to delve inward, to become an astute cartographer of your own emotional topography. This is where the phenomenon of being sucked in manifests. Once a trigger is activated, it often bypasses the rational mind. We forego measured contemplation, surrendering instead to the immediate dominion of emotion. This instantaneous, often visceral, emotional torrent pulls us from our own stable equilibrium into the orbit of another's. So consumed are we by indignation or defense that our original intentions for the interaction recede, replaced by a reactive posture. Our capacity to navigate the exchange, to preserve our own context and emotional tenor, evaporates. The repertoire of these triggers is remarkably diverse. For some, it is direct criticism of their work or character. For others, it may be a perceived slight, an act of disrespect, however unintentional. A particular vocal inflection, a condescending or impatient tone, can suffice. Repeated interruptions, or the failure to acknowledge contributions, can also serve as catalysts. Even seemingly minor occurrences, such as a sigh or a fleeting facial expression, can activate a sensitive button. The crucial determinant is not the objective event itself, but the personal significance we imbue it with, often on an unconscious level. When a trigger is engaged, the internal experience transcends a simple thought like, "That person is being rude." It often ignites a cascade of sensations and feelings. A constriction in the chest, a flush of heat across the face, a clenching in the stomach. Thoughts may race, leaping to dire conclusions about the other's motives. Past experiences of similar emotional states may resurface. This internal tempest is the immediate consequence of a trigger being activated, the physical and mental manifestation of your internal frame being assailed. Consider Sarah, who meticulously crafts a project and presents it to her team. A colleague, Mark, remarks, "That's an interesting approach, but I'm not sure it's the most efficient." For Sarah, this comment, even if delivered with neutral intent, strikes a resonant chord. Internally, she hears not just inefficient, but not good enough, you failed again, and perhaps an echo of childhood critiques, suggesting her efforts were perpetually inadequate. Her chest tightens. Her mind immediately conjures justifications for Mark's error and begins formulating a robust defense. Her initial aim of collaborative discussion dissolves, replaced by an imperative to refute Mark and validate her worth. She has been sucked into a reactive mode, her frame shifting from collaborative to defensive. The transcript astutely observes, genuine reactions cannot be faked when triggered. This is because a triggered response originates from a deeper, more automatic stratum. When truly provoked, our carefully constructed defenses can disintegrate, exposing the raw emotion beneath. Consequently, attempting to merely suppress a reaction is a Sisyphean endeavor. One can maintain a placid exterior, but if the underlying trigger remains unaddressed, the emotion persists, simmering, awaiting another eruption. Authentic emotional mastery, and thus robust frame control, is not about feigning indifference. It is about comprehending the genesis of our reactions and cultivating the ability to manage that internal response. How, then, does one embark on this journey of recognition? It commences with unvarnished self-scrutiny and a willingness to embrace vulnerability with oneself. It necessitates observing one's own responses without immediate condemnation. When you detect an unusually potent emotional surge, anger, defensiveness, profound sadness, or frustration, pause. Inquire, what precisely transpired? What was articulated or enacted? And more crucially, how did that resonate within me at a fundamental level? The act of compiling a list, as suggested, can prove remarkably beneficial. Discard the pursuit of perfection, simply begin to enumerate situations, phrases, or behaviors that consistently elicit a strong emotional response. Be precise. Instead of people being mean, articulate when my ideas are dismissed in a meeting or when my partner employs sarcasm during a serious discussion. Let us revisit Sarah's predicament. If Sarah were to compile a list of her triggers, it might include being informed that my work is substandard, having my competence questioned, feeling overlooked or disregarded, colleagues adopting a condescending tone. When Mark offered his critique, Sarah's trigger was activated. The internal experience was a surge of anxiety and defensiveness. Her thoughts immediately pivoted to affirming her competence and discrediting Mark's assessment. This internal shift precluded her from focusing on the meeting's collaborative objective. Her attention was now consumed by self-defense. Her frame contracted into a defensive posture, fixated on her perceived inadequacy. The recognition of this trigger marks the initial step toward regaining control. By understanding that Mark's comment, irrespective of his intent, resonated with her insecurity regarding her competence, Sarah can begin to neutralize its power. She can perceive that her intense reaction is not solely attributable to Mark's words, but to her own deeply ingrained belief that she may not be sufficient. This insight directly contributes to maintaining her frame. If Sarah identifies this as a personal trigger, she can consciously elect a different course of action. Rather than immediately launching into a defensive retort, she could inhale deeply and state, "Thank you for that feedback, Mark. Could you elaborate on what you mean by inefficient so I can better understand your perspective?" This response neither negates her feelings nor redirects her energy from reacting to her trigger toward constructively engaging with the situation. She is no longer sucked in by her internal reaction. She is actively steering the conversation back to its intended purpose. Her frame remains open and collaborative, rather than becoming constricted and defensive. The power inherent in recognizing your triggers lies precisely in this transformation. It elevates you from a passive recipient of emotional impact to an active observer of your internal landscape. It permits you to perceive that while others may press the buttons, you possess the capacity to understand their location, and ultimately, to learn how to modulate the responses they elicit. This is not an endeavor to become devoid of emotion. It is in pursuit of emotional intelligence. It is the comprehension that our emotional responses are signals, not imperatives. Consider another scenario. David is conversing with his adolescent son, who is being evasive about his whereabouts. David's trigger is being deceived. When his son mutters an unclear response, David feels a surge of anger. His voice escalates, demanding the truth. He is convinced his son is concealing something serious. His frame is now one of accusation and authority. Were David to recognize his trigger, he might pause. He might ask himself, what is it about being lied to that troubles me so profoundly? Perhaps he discovers it stems from a childhood where he felt powerless and manipulated. With this understanding, he can adopt a different approach. Instead of immediate accusation, he could say, in a calmer tone, "Hey, I just need to know where you're going. It's important to me that we're honest with each other. Can you tell me more clearly?" This approach acknowledges his trigger, the desire for honesty, but selects a response less likely to sever communication and more inclined to foster it. He is preserving his frame of wanting honesty and connection rather than reverting to an angry, accusatory posture that will likely engender further evasion. The bedrock of this undertaking is self-awareness. It demands that we possess the courage to examine our own reactions and pose the questions, why am I experiencing this? And what portion of this reaction is intrinsically mine? It is the understanding that when we feel intensely provoked, it is often because something we deeply cherish, or something we fear has been touched. The variegated nature of triggers also necessitates patience with ourselves and with others. What may be a minor inconvenience for one individual could represent a significant trigger for another. This realization cultivates empathy, not only for others but for ourselves. We can begin to perceive our own reactions not as deficiencies, but as emissaries from our inner selves, soliciting attention and comprehension. When we can reliably identify the external cues and internal sensations that herald the activation of our emotional buttons, we gain the critical initial insight into our own reactivity. This awareness is not a terminus, but the indispensable starting point for cultivating the inner discipline that empowers us to select our response rather than being dictated by our triggers. The subsequent step, therefore, is to comprehend how to begin disarming these triggers and nurturing a more stable, resilient internal disposition. It is the genesis of constructing a more formidable, unassailable frame. 3. Practicing inner work. We often mistake outward composure for inner control, believing that projecting an unflappable facade, devoid of vulnerability, is the hallmark of true mastery. This is akin to applying a fresh coat of paint to a rusty surface. It offers a fleeting aesthetic improvement, but leaves the underlying decay untouched. Genuine control, the kind that constructs a robust frame as stable, guiding context for our interactions, springs not from such performative displays, but from a profound wellspring of internal mastery. Without this foundational inner work, any semblance of calm we project is merely a fragile veneer, poised to shatter at the slightest provocation. Recall a moment when you felt utterly unmoored in a conversation. Perhaps a barbed remark struck a raw nerve, or a situation veered unexpectedly off course. Your heart might have hammered, your thoughts become a tangled mess, and suddenly you were no longer steering the interaction, but merely adrift, reacting. You were sucked in, as we've explored. This phenomenon occurs because an old, unaddressed emotional trigger has been activated beneath the surface. To simply command yourself to calm down in such a moment is as futile as instructing a leaky faucet to cease dripping without addressing the faulty washer. The external pressure to appear composed may compel you to maintain an outward appearance of control, but the internal mechanism remains compromised. This is the illusion of superficial control and exercise in managing the appearance of calm, not cultivating its reality. The true power of frame control lies not in the suppression of emotion, but in its profound understanding and internal mastery. So, how do we transition from this fragile performance to authentic inner strength? It commences with an unwavering commitment to honest self-exploration. The bedrock of this journey is self-awareness, the identification of your buttons. These are not tangible objects, but deeply ingrained emotional triggers, those specific stimuli that reliably provoke a potent, often disproportionate, emotional response. They are the sensitive points that, when touched, cause your composure to unravel. Unearthing these buttons demands a willingness to gaze inward with unvarnished honesty. It requires meticulous attention to those junctures where defensiveness, anger, anxiety, or overwhelming distress surfaces. What precipices preceded these feelings? Who was present? What precise words were uttered, or what actions were taken? Frequently, these triggers are intricately woven with past experiences, unmet needs, or fundamental beliefs about ourselves and the world. For instance, an individual might harbor a button related to feeling ignored or dismissed, a residue from childhood experiences where their voice went unheard. In adulthood, a casual remark implying a lack of attentiveness could precipitate a spiral of frustration or insecurity, leading to a defensive reaction and a loss of frame. To embark on the process of identifying your buttons, consider maintaining a simple trigger journal. For a week or two, whenever you experience a pronounced emotional reaction, jot down a few key observations. What occurred? A concise description of the situation. How did I feel? Articulate the emotion: anger, sadness, fear, frustration, etc. What was said or done? Note the specific words or actions. What was my response? Did I retort? Become anxious? Approach these observations without judgment. Simply bear witness. Over time, discernible patterns will emerge. Recurring themes will surface: certain forms of criticism, particular vocal inflections, specific social contexts, or even certain individuals that consistently press your buttons. Recognizing these patterns is not an act of self-recrimination or blame directed at others. It is about acquiring crucial insight. This self-awareness is the indispensable first step, for one cannot master that which one does not comprehend. If the mechanisms that cause you to lose your frame remain obscure, you will perpetually be at the mercy of those triggers. Once your buttons have been identified, the subsequent vital step is to cultivate the practice of letting go, emotional detachment, and processing. This is the crucible of true inner work. Letting go is not synonymous with suppressing feelings or feigning their non-existence. That is the superficial approach we aim to transcend. Rather, it is the art of observing emotions without surrendering their control. It is the process of neutralizing the emotional charge associated with a trigger and consciously choosing not to allow it to dictate your actions or compromise your frame. Envision an emotion as a wave. When a trigger strikes, it is akin to a colossal wave engulfing you. If you lack the practice of letting go, you are swept away, losing your footing and your sense of direction. However, with diligent practice, you can learn to anticipate the wave's approach, comprehend its power, and ride it without being pulled under. You acknowledge its presence, feel its force, yet you do not permit it to dictate your trajectory. A potent technique for this is mindfulness. Mindfulness is the simple act of paying attention to the present moment, devoid of judgment. When an emotional trigger ignites, instead of reacting instantaneously, endeavor to pause. Inhale deeply. Observe the physical manifestations of the emotion within your body, perhaps a constriction in your chest, a knot in your stomach, or heat flushing your face. Simply bear witness to these sensations. Then acknowledge the emotion itself. I am experiencing anger, or this is anxiety. This act of observation carves a vital space between the trigger and your response. It is akin to stepping back from the wave rather than being subsumed by it. Another highly effective practice is journaling. After identifying a trigger and its accompanying emotion, commit your thoughts to paper. Delve into the feelings, the accompanying thoughts, and the underlying beliefs that may be at play. Pose the questions: what is this emotion attempting to convey? Is this reaction commensurate with the situation, or is it amplified by a past hurt? Writing can help to untangle complex emotions and foster clarity, enabling more effective processing. Therapeutic modalities, such as cognitive behavioral therapy (CBT) or dialectical behavior therapy (DBT), offer structured frameworks for identifying distorted thought patterns and developing coping mechanisms for intense emotions. These therapies provide practical tools for discerning the origins of our reactions and fostering healthier responses. The operative principle here is conscious choice. Upon identifying a trigger, you are not compelled to respond in the old, automatic fashion. You possess the capacity to pause, observe your emotions, and then deliberately select your course of action. This choice is the very essence of frame control. It is the reclamation of your agency. This leads us to a critical realization. Emotional mastery is not a singular achievement, but an ongoing discipline. Cultivating resilience is analogous to building physical strength. It necessitates sustained effort over time. One does not visit the gym once and attain lifelong fitness. Similarly, practicing mindfulness or journaling sporadically will not render you impervious to emotional triggers. It is the consistent, dedicated practice that forges genuine emotional resilience. Each instance you intercept an impulsive reaction, pause, breathe, and opt for a more conscious response, you are strengthening your frame muscle. Every moment spent observing an emotion without succumbing to it, every instance where understanding triumphs over anger, reinforces your capacity to remain centered. This cumulative effect renders you less susceptible to being sucked in by the emotions of others or by challenging circumstances. Your frame becomes more robust, less prone to disruption. You begin to influence the dynamic of an interaction rather than being a passive participant buffeted by its currents. This unwavering inner work also illuminates a profound truth: the indispensable role of vulnerability in strength. We often conflate vulnerability with weakness, an attribute to be concealed. However, within the context of inner work, acknowledging our emotional vulnerabilities is, in fact, a testament to immense strength. When you honestly examine your triggers and emotional patterns, you are engaging in vulnerability with yourself. This self-acceptance, this willingness to perceive and comprehend your own imperfections, is the wellspring of authentic strength. Having undertaken the inner work to understand your buttons and mastered the art of processing your emotions, you have less to fear. You are no longer perpetually on guard, striving to conceal perceived flaws. This authenticity fosters more genuine connections with others. Individuals are often more receptive to someone who possesses self-awareness and manages their emotions with maturity, rather than someone who is perpetually defensive or emotionally volatile. Your strong, internally grounded frame enables you to be more open and less apprehensive, which, paradoxically, enhances your influence and earns you greater respect. Consider the trajectory of Eleanor Roosevelt. She navigated immense public scrutiny and personal adversity, yet maintained a remarkable composure and influence. While her inner practices remain a matter of conjecture, her public life suggests a deep attunement to human nature and a quiet strength that transcended outward bravado. She was renowned for her empathy and her innate ability to connect with individuals from all strata of society. This likely stemmed from her personal journey of self-discovery and her willingness to confront difficult truths, both personal and societal. She did not merely perform resilience, she cultivated it through a profound inner engagement with the world and with herself. The palpable, observable indicators that betray a reliance on superficial control rather than genuine inner work are often subtle yet revealing. Such individuals may exhibit a rigid adherence to rules or expectations, becoming visibly agitated or defensive when these are questioned. Even in minor ways, they might overreact to perceived slights, exhibiting disproportionate anger or hurt over matters that others might readily dismiss. Their communication may become excessively formal or guarded, lacking genuine warmth or spontaneity, as if they are perpetually monitoring their own words and expressions. In challenging conversations, they may withdraw, become dismissive, or resort to platitudes rather than engaging with the underlying emotional currents. Their calm often feels brittle, easily shattered by unexpected events or direct emotional challenges, revealing the performance rather than the substance of their control. Beyond the mere identification of triggers, what are the practical, sequential methodologies a reader can employ to initiate the process of letting go of the emotional charge associated with those triggers? 1. The pause and breathe technique. The instant you sense a trigger activating, consciously halt. Before uttering a word or taking any action, take 3 slow, deep breaths. Inhale through your nose, exhale deliberately through your mouth. This simple act disrupts the automatic reaction cycle, creating a crucial window for conscious choice. 2. Body scan meditation. When an emotion begins to surface, gently shift your awareness to your body. Locate where you feel the sensation. Is it in your chest, your stomach, your shoulders? Without attempting to alter it, simply observe the physical feeling. This practice helps you connect with the emotion as a physical experience, rather than becoming lost in the narrative behind it. 3. Labeling the emotion. Once you have noted the physical sensation, assign a name to the emotion. State inwardly, I am feeling frustrated, or this is anxiety. This simple act of labeling can significantly diminish the emotion's intensity, transforming it from a vague, overwhelming sensation into a more defined experience that you can observe. 4. Questioning your thoughts. When triggered, our minds often engage in rapid-fire thoughts. Gently interrogate these thoughts. Ask yourself, is this thought unequivocally true? What is an alternative perspective on this situation? Is this reaction rooted in the current circumstance, or is it a resurgence of a past hurt? 5. Journaling for processing. Dedicate a few minutes each day to chronicle your emotional experiences. Focus on a specific trigger you have identified. Record what transpired, your emotional state, and the thoughts that coursed through your mind. Subsequently, explore the potential underlying causes of this reaction. Is it a fear of inadequacy? A need for control? This written exploration facilitates the externalization and processing of the emotion. 6. Mindful acceptance. Practice the art of accepting emotions as transient and natural phenomena. Instead of resisting or battling difficult feelings, endeavor to allow them to exist without judgment. Consider it akin to observing clouds drift across the sky. They are present, yet they do not define the sky itself. By diligently engaging in this practice of practicing inner work, we begin to dismantle the automatic reactivity that has historically dictated our responses. This internal transformation lays the groundwork for a more conscious and powerful way of interacting with the world. The subsequent crucial step in solidifying this newfound mastery is understanding how to translate this inner stability into outward communication, ensuring our frame is not just maintained, but powerfully projected. 4. Strength through emotional control. In the grand theater of human interaction, our emotions often feel like the loudest actors, demanding center stage. We might believe that expressing our feelings forcefully, whether with anger or a torrent of anxiety, is a sign of passion or conviction. It's easy to think that showing how strongly we feel is the way to be heard, to be taken seriously, and to get our way. But in the world of influence and connection, this outward display can often signal the opposite of strength. It can, in fact, reveal a frame that is easily shaken, a foundation that is not quite solid. When we react with an immediate surge of emotion, a sharp retort when challenged, a flush of defensiveness when questioned, or a palpable wave of frustration when things don't go as planned, we are broadcasting a message, often unintentionally. This message is that our internal state is being dictated by external events or by the other person's words and actions. It's as if we are saying, you have the power to disturb my peace, to upset my balance. And in doing so, we invite others to step into that disturbance. This is where the idea of a weak frame comes into play. Our frame is our personal space of influence, the context we set for an interaction, the emotional tone we establish. When we react emotionally, we are allowing someone else to pull us into their emotional space, or worse, to dictate the emotional landscape of the conversation. We become less the director of the scene and more an actor responding to cues we didn't intend to receive. Consider this. Have you ever been in a conversation where one person becomes visibly angry or upset? Often, the other person feels a pull to match that energy, to defend themselves, or to attempt to quell the storm. This is the weak frame being drawn into the emotional vortex. The person who remains calm, who doesn't immediately mirror the anger or defensiveness, doesn't necessarily feel less. They are simply not letting their emotions hijack their response. They are maintaining their own internal landscape, their own frame. This isn't about being cold or unfeeling. It's about possessing a stable core that isn't easily destabilized by the emotional weather outside. When we can remain grounded, our frame stays intact. We can still acknowledge the other person's emotions, but we don't get swept away by them. This ability to remain centered, even when faced with strong emotions from others, is a profound form of strength. It's the strength that allows us to think clearly, to choose our words wisely, and to guide the interaction rather than being dragged along by it. This brings us to a common misunderstanding, the notion that we can simply fake emotional control. We might attempt to put on a brave face, to speak in a measured tone, or to nod calmly while inwardly churning with frustration or anxiety. This is akin to trying to patch a leaky dam with a band-aid. While it might hold for a short while, the pressure will eventually find a way through. True emotional control isn't about suppression or pretense. It's not about stuffing feelings down or plastering a smile on your face when you feel anything but happy. That kind of surface-level technique is fragile. Underneath, the raw emotion is still present, waiting for its moment to erupt. When that moment arrives, perhaps when you're tired, stressed, or caught off guard, the facade crumbles, and your true emotional state, the one you've been trying to conceal, bursts forth. This reveals a frame that was never truly strong, merely temporarily masked. The transcript from our initial exploration touched upon this, highlighting that deep inner work and letting go are crucial. This isn't about learning a few tricks to appear calm. It's about a fundamental shift within. It means understanding why certain things provoke us, why we feel the urge to react in a certain way. It's about addressing the roots of our emotional responses, not just the branches. When we engage in this deep inner work, we're not faking it. We are genuinely cultivating a more resilient inner self. This resilience means that when a trigger appears, our initial reaction might still be a flicker of emotion, but it doesn't have to spiral into an uncontrolled outburst. We have developed the capacity to pause, to observe our feelings without being consumed by them, and to choose a response that aligns with our goals and values, rather than being dictated by an impulsive emotional surge. This is the essence of genuine emotional mastery. So, how do we embark on this journey of cultivating true emotional control? The first, and perhaps most critical, step is self-awareness. We need to become detectives of our own inner world, observing our reactions and understanding what sets them off. The transcript suggested making a list. Analyze yourself. What are my buttons? This is an invitation to identify your personal emotional triggers, those specific people, situations, words, or events that reliably push your buttons and elicit a strong emotional response. These are the sensitive spots, the areas where your frame is most vulnerable. Think of your emotional triggers like sensitive nerves. When they are pressed, they send a signal that can feel overwhelming. For one person, a trigger might be a perceived slight or disrespect. For another, it might be a feeling of being ignored or undervalued. Someone else might be triggered by criticism, even if it's constructive, or by a perceived lack of competence in themselves or others. These triggers are deeply personal, shaped by our past experiences, our beliefs about ourselves and the world, and our unmet needs. The act of identifying them is not about self-criticism, it's about gaining knowledge. It's like a physician understanding a patient's allergies before prescribing medication. You cannot manage a trigger if you do not know it exists. When you begin to make this list, be honest and specific. Don't simply write people who are annoying. Instead, endeavor to pinpoint what about their behavior is annoying. Is it their tone of voice? Their specific words? Their perceived attitude? Is it when they interrupt you? Or when they dismiss your ideas? The more precise you are, the better you can understand the pattern. For example, instead of criticism, you might identify being told I made a mistake on a report by my supervisor, or a friend pointing out a flaw in my cooking. These specific instances are your buttons. Once you have identified these triggers, the next phase is to develop strategies for managing their impact. This is where proactive emotional control takes over. Knowing that a certain situation is likely to push your buttons allows you to prepare. You can anticipate the feeling, acknowledge it internally without letting it take over, and then consciously choose how to respond. For instance, if you know that being interrupted makes you feel disrespected and angry, you can prepare yourself. When it happens, you can take a deep breath, remind yourself that this is a trigger, and perhaps say something like, "Excuse me, I wasn't finished with my thought," in a calm, firm tone. This is not about suppressing the feeling of being interrupted, but about not letting the resulting anger dictate your actions. You are using your awareness to guide your response. This process of identifying and managing triggers is the bedrock of building a strong frame. It's about developing an internal resilience that isn't easily swayed by external forces. It's about reclaiming the reins of your emotional responses. When you are no longer a slave to your immediate reactions, you gain a significant advantage in any interaction. You can think more clearly, assess the situation more accurately, and communicate your needs and intentions more effectively. Consider the power of calm. It's not a passive state, it's an active demonstration of inner strength. When you can maintain a calm, grounded demeanor in the face of provocation, chaos, or intense emotion from others, you are projecting a powerful message. You are subcommunicating that you are in control, that you are not easily rattled, and that you are a stable presence. This calmness can have a ripple effect on those around you. It can de-escalate tense situations. It can make people feel safer and more trusting. It can create an environment where rational thought and constructive dialogue are possible rather than a battle of escalating emotions. Imagine a high-stakes negotiation. One party is visibly agitated, their voice rising, their gestures becoming more forceful. They are attempting to exert influence through sheer emotional pressure. The other party, however, remains seated, their posture relaxed, their voice steady and measured. Even if the agitated party is making valid points, their emotional display can undermine their credibility and make the other party defensive. The calm negotiator, on the other hand, is not swayed. They can listen more effectively, process the information without the fog of their own emotional reaction, and respond thoughtfully. This calm presence doesn't signify weakness or indifference. It means they have mastered their internal state. This mastery allows them to be more persuasive, more strategic, and ultimately, more influential. This isn't about being a robot. It's about being human, but a human who has cultivated a deep understanding of their own emotional landscape. It's about recognizing that emotions are signals, not commands. They are information, not directives. When we can treat them as such, we can learn from them without being controlled by them. This is the essence of strength through emotional control. It is the ability to feel, to acknowledge, and to process emotions without letting them dictate our actions or compromise our influence. The process of identifying your emotional buttons is an ongoing one. As you grow and encounter new experiences, new triggers may emerge, or old ones might shift in their intensity. The key is to maintain a practice of self-reflection. Regularly check in with yourself. What situations left you feeling unsettled or reactive? What emotions did you experience? What was happening around you? This continuous self-analysis is not about dwelling on negativity, but about building a more robust understanding of yourself. It's an investment in your own emotional resilience, which directly translates into a stronger, more stable frame in all your interactions. When we can consistently manage our emotional responses, we become a source of stability for ourselves and for those around us. This is a powerful form of leadership, not just in formal roles, but in our personal relationships, our families, and our communities. It allows us to navigate conflict with grace, to build trust through our consistency, and to foster environments where genuine connection and understanding can flourish. The strength we find in emotional control is not the brute force of aggression, but the quiet, unwavering power of a well-tended inner garden capable of weathering any storm. It is the foundation upon which true influence is built, not through manipulation or coercion, but through the authentic strength of a mastered self. Once we understand that true strength in communication stems not from the force of our emotions, but from the mastery of them, we can begin to explore the practical techniques for building this inner resilience. The next step is to move beyond mere identification of triggers and into the active cultivation of a stable internal landscape, which leads us to the principles of anchoring your inner state. 5. Influencing others with calm. The power of calm is not the stoic indifference of a statue, unfeeling and remote. Instead, it is a profound, quiet strength born from self-awareness. This inner fortitude is the very essence of what we term frame control, the indispensable key to genuinely influencing others, not through coercion, but by embodying a steadfast, dependable presence that gently guides the discourse. Picture a conversation as a river. Emotions are the powerful currents that threaten to sweep you away, while your calm frame is the unyielding vessel that allows you to navigate these waters without succumbing to their pull. This inner equilibrium, this mastery over one's own emotional currents, acts as a silent beacon. When you can maintain your composure, even amidst another's agitation or attempts at provocation, you establish an anchor of stability within the interaction. This stability does not demand notice, it simply exists. And precisely because it stands in stark contrast to the typical reactive energy that often saturates tense exchanges, it possesses a subtle power to draw others in. They may find their own intensity diminishing, their emotional tempo slowing, as you withhold the fuel for their reaction. It is akin to holding a steady light in the encroaching darkness. It does not battle the shadows, but rather illuminates a path forward. This is the primary, and perhaps most potent, way in which calm influences others. By preventing your own immersion in their emotional tempest, you create the fertile ground for a different kind of engagement to blossom. They may raise their voices, but if yours remains even and your posture relaxed, you communicate that their shouting does not dictate the situation. You are holding the frame, and this exerts a profound, often unspoken influence. Consider the practical application of this principle in everyday encounters. Imagine a customer service representative facing an irate caller. If the representative falters, their voice may climb, their breath may quicken, and a defensive tone might emerge. This signals a fragile frame. The caller, sensing this vulnerability, may escalate their agitation, feeling they have gained an advantage. Conversely, if the representative maintains a composed, even tone, speaks with clarity, and refrains from interrupting, they are upholding their frame. This unwavering presence often serves to de-escalate the situation. While the caller may remain displeased, they are less likely to feel that aggression is the winning strategy and more likely to feel heard and understood, which is frequently their underlying need. This is not about adopting a robotic demeanor, but about having cultivated the capacity to respond thoughtfully rather than simply reacting to another's emotional state. The conveyance of this calm is often achieved through subtle, nonverbal cues and the nuanced modulation of our voice. These are the quiet pronouncements of our frame. Steady eye contact, for instance, signifies presence and engagement rather than fluster or evasion. It communicates confidence. Deliberate breathing, consciously imperceptible yet intuitively felt, signals a state of repose, a mind unburdened by anxiety or anger. Our posture, too, plays a significant role. Standing or sitting with an erect bearing and relaxed shoulders conveys a sense of groundedness. Now let us examine the voice. This is where a weak frame often betrays itself. When individuals feel insecure or overwhelmed, their voice may naturally rise at the end of sentences, transforming declarative statements into interrogatives. For example, instead of asserting, "We can investigate that for you," they might inquire, "We can investigate that for you?" This subtle shift signals uncertainty. It communicates to the listener, "I am not entirely confident in my ability to resolve this, and I am seeking confirmation that I am incorrect." This wavering tone renders one vulnerable. It invites the other party to assume control, to fill the void of your uncertainty with their own demands or expectations. They can then exert influence because your own vocal cues betray a lack of command. Conversely, a consistent, even tone where sentences conclude with a clear, firm cadence communicates conviction and a stable frame. It declares, "I am in command of this conversation and I possess clarity." This distinction brings us to a critical juncture, the divergence between reacting and responding. Our innate tendencies often propel us toward reaction. An event occurs and our immediate, automatic emotional response is triggered. This is akin to a reflex action. If subjected to criticism, the instinct may be to become defensive, to retaliate, or to withdraw. This is a reaction, instigated by deeply ingrained triggers, often stemming from past experiences. It is like pressing a button that immediately sounds an alarm. Responding, however, represents a different modality. It involves creating a deliberate interval between an event and one's action. It is the recognition of choice. Emotional mastery facilitates this pause. It is the space where one can observe one's own feelings without being overwhelmed. One can acknowledge, "That remark has evoked a defensive reaction in me," or "I am beginning to feel anger." Once this awareness is established, one can then select the subsequent course of action. Rather than an immediate retort, one can opt to pose a clarifying question, articulate one's perspective with equanimity, or even take a moment to gather one's thoughts before speaking. This conscious selection, this deliberate response, empowers one to direct the interaction. You are no longer a marionette whose strings are manipulated by your emotions, you are the puppeteer, orchestrating your own movements. To cultivate this capacity for response over reaction, we must become diligent investigators of our inner landscape. We must identify our personal buttons, those specific words, actions, or circumstances that tend to elicit a potent emotional response. This endeavor is not always straightforward. Our buttons are often deeply embedded, connected to past hurts or insecurities. Yet, the effort is paramount. Compiling a list of these triggers can be remarkably insightful. For instance, one might observe a heightened defensiveness when competence is questioned, or a surge of anxiety when confronted with unexpected criticism. Once a button has been identified, the subsequent step is to comprehend its nature. Why does this particular stimulus provoke such a strong reaction? Is it linked to a past experience? Does it touch upon a latent fear? This introspective analysis is not an exercise in dwelling on the past, but in understanding the origins of one's reactions. To begin loosening their hold, it is akin to locating the source of a leak before attempting repairs. When aware that a certain topic or comment is likely to press a particular button, one can preemptively prepare. One can remind oneself, "This might elicit a reaction, but I am not compelled to respond impulsively. I can choose to respond with calm." This preparation transforms one from a victim of triggers to the master of one's responses. It is imperative to recognize that this calm, this ability to respond with deliberation, cannot be feigned. Authenticity is palpable. If one endeavors to project calmness while experiencing inner turmoil, that internal disquiet will likely manifest in subtle ways: a clenched jaw, a forced smile, or a strained vocal quality. True influence through calm emanates from genuine internal work. It involves nurturing a deep reservoir of resilience, processing past wounds, and developing a compassionate understanding of oneself and others. This is not a superficial remedy, it is a journey of self-discovery and metamorphosis. Engaging in this profound internal work transcends mere emotional regulation. It is about comprehending one's emotions, accepting them, and relinquishing those that no longer serve a purpose. This act of letting go is critical. It entails releasing the imperative to be correct, the need for external validation, and the inclination to harbor resentments. When one can genuinely release, a sense of lightness ensues, fostering greater adaptability and significantly diminishing susceptibility to entanglement in another's drama. One's frame becomes not only robust, but also healthily permeable, capable of absorbing information and understanding perspectives without emotional compromise. This process of internal transformation is what imbues one's calm with genuine influence. Approaching a challenging conversation with a clear mind and a steady heart allows the other party to perceive it. They may be accustomed to encounters characterized by defensiveness or emotional outbursts, and your composed presence can serve to disarm them. It may prompt them to pause and reevaluate their own approach. This is not manipulation, it is the natural outcome of presenting a stable, grounded self. Let us examine how maintaining a calm frame specifically neutralizes aggressive or emotionally charged communication. When individuals resort to shouting or harsh language, they often seek to establish dominance through intimidation. Their aim is to induce discomfort, pressure, and ultimately, capitulation. If one responds with fear, anger, or defensiveness, it effectively validates their aggressive posture. It demonstrates that their tactics are succeeding. However, by remaining calm, one's steady demeanor can disrupt their strategy. The absence of a strong emotional reaction deprives them of the anticipated feedback. They may experience confusion or even frustration, as their customary methods fail to yield the desired outcome. The observable effect on their behavior can be a gradual de-escalation. Their voice may lower, their body language may relax, or they may even begin to articulate their concerns more rationally. They are responding to your calm, not to their initial outburst. Your stable frame has, in essence, invited them to engage in a different, more constructive mode of interaction. This leads us to the active communication strategies and shifts in mindset that a calm individual employs. It is not merely a matter of passively refraining from reacting. A calm person actively directs the conversation. A primary strategy is active listening, augmented by a layer of calm observation. This involves truly absorbing what the other person is conveying, both verbally and non-verbally, without immediately formulating a defense or counter-argument. It entails nodding, maintaining eye contact, and reflecting back what has been heard in a neutral tone. So, if I understand correctly, you are feeling frustrated because this demonstrates engagement and a desire for comprehension, which can alleviate tension. Another active strategy involves posing open-ended, clarifying questions. Instead of asserting that is unfair, a calm individual might inquire, "Could you help me understand what leads you to feel that way?" Or what specifically about this situation is causing concern? These questions foster dialogue and problem-solving rather than escalating conflict. They also signal that one is in control of their emotions and is invested in finding a resolution. The accompanying shift in mindset is equally vital. A calm individual typically approaches interactions with a disposition of curiosity rather than judgment. They perceive challenging situations as opportunities for understanding rather than as personal affronts. They also operate with a conviction in their own agency, the understanding that while they cannot control others, they invariably possess control over their own responses and their internal state. This is the bedrock of frame control. It is about internal mastery, not external manipulation. Manipulative tactics aim to control others through deception or coercion. Frame control, conversely, is about fostering an environment of clarity and respect through one's own inner stability. It is about being so grounded that others naturally feel more at ease and more inclined to engage constructively. The power of calm is not about suppressing emotions or becoming a passive spectator. It is about cultivating a profound inner resilience that enables one to confront life's challenges with clarity and purpose. When one masters their own emotional terrain, they naturally begin to shape the dynamics of their interactions. Your calm becomes a steadying anchor, guiding conversations, neutralizing aggression, and opening avenues for genuine understanding and connection. This is the true potency of mastering your frame. Conclusion: the journey we have undertaken has illuminated a profound truth. Our most potent influence and our deepest reservoirs of control originate not from the amplification of our voice or the exertion of sheer force, but from the diligent cultivation of our inner quietude. We have observed how readily we can be swept into the emotional tides of others, our own thoughts and intentions, dissolving in their wake. This occurs when our internal frame, the stable context, the guiding principles, and the emotional tenor we establish, begins to falter. When this foundation weakens, we are easily ensnared, becoming reactive and losing our equilibrium. Yet, the true power resides in the deliberate construction and steadfast maintenance of a robust frame. This is not an exercise in rigidity or emotional detachment. Rather, it is the nurturing of a serene, lucid, and emotionally anchored presence that naturally guides our interactions. The authentic path to this power has always been trodden through introspection, through the profound understanding of ourselves and the mastery of our internal emotional terrain. Many erroneously equate influence with volubility, assertiveness, or even aggression. They endeavor to command circumstances by imposing their will externally, a strategy that often yields a brittle form of control, susceptible to disruption. Frame control offers a more enduring and substantive alternative, rooted fundamentally in self-mastery. Before we can effectively steer a dialogue or a relationship, we must first learn to navigate ourselves. This necessitates an honest appraisal of our internal landscape, particularly those sensitive points, our personal buttons, that are so easily pressed. The genuine transformation unfolds when we commit to the arduous yet rewarding work of understanding these triggers and then practice the art of authentic emotional release. This is not about suppressing feelings, but about acknowledging them without permitting them to dictate our actions. When we achieve this, our frame becomes remarkably resilient. It is a quiet authority that eschews ostentation, but inherently commands respect. This inner stability not only refines our conversations, but also fosters a more tranquil, predictable internal world, which in turn softens the asperities of our external reality. It is a superior form of strength, forged not by brute force, but by wisdom and self-awareness. The mastery of your frame is not a finite achievement, but an ongoing practice, a daily discipline that imbues every interaction with richness. Regard each conversation, each challenge, as an opportunity to gently hone your inner steadiness. Persevere in the practice of self-observation. Cultivate the habit of noticing when your frame begins to waver, when a familiar trigger sparks that predictable urge toward reactivity. Refrain from self-judgment when this transpires, simply observe. The objective is not to become impervious to triggers, but to attain such a level of awareness that you can consciously choose your response. This lies at the very heart of frame control, the transition from reactive impulse to mindful deliberation. Progress may not always be linear. There will be days when old patterns reassert themselves, when your frame feels less secure. This is entirely natural. True strength lies in your unwavering commitment to gently guide yourself back, to patiently and persistently recenter your frame. Employ the tools we have explored: mindful breathing, subtle vocal modulation, the reframing of thoughts, to construct your personal repertoire for composure. Consider sharing your journey with trusted confidants or seeking out kindred spirits dedicated to this path of inner cultivation. Together, we can mutually support the development of a more stable inner world. As you continue to practice and fortify your frame, you will navigate the world with a novel form of quiet authority. Individuals will gravitate toward your steady presence, not because you demand it, but because it represents a rare and invaluable quality. Your influence will become more authentic, earned through self-awareness and emotional integrity rather than through artifice or coercion. This mastery of your frame is the linchpin to a life lived with greater intent, diminished stress, and a deeper, more profound sense of purpose. Step forward, secure in the knowledge that the power to shape your experience and to positively shape the world around you resides within the unshakable strength of your own calm frame.